And moving on to Nigeria, the US has put boots on the ground in the African country, which has been grappling with Islamic State terror attacks. And now, to counter the menace, the US has deployed a small military team to Nigeria. The move was announced by the head of the US Africa Command, General Dagvin Anderson. The US official said that the decision followed his meeting with Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu in Rome last year.
We agreed that we needed to work together on the way forward in the region. That has led to increased collaboration between our nations to include a small U.S. team that brings some unique capabilities from the United States in order to augment what Nigeria has been doing for several years.
Nigeria's Defense Minister, Christopher Musa, has also confirmed that a team was working in the country. Now, this announcement comes after the U.S. launched strikes targeting ISIS terrorists in Nigeria's Sokoto state on Christmas. The strikes were conducted in coordination with Nigerian authorities.
All right. Welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where we talk about all things news on the continent of Africa. I will turn it over to my co-host before I introduce myself. I think you're on mute. Not anymore. The sound has gone. I'll do a quick intro while Gloria's sound gets fixed. So I'm Joe Hatagwa, co-host of This Week in Africa. I also am the founder of Authentic African Media, where we help people visit, move, and invest in Africa. And of course, we do these weekly live streams where we talk about the news on the continent for those of you who are planning to move, visit, or invest, so you are aware of the locations that you're planning to do one of those three things in. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gloria for her intro.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
I guess I'm having issues with my mic. Hello, everyone. My name is Gloria Ayo, founder at Diaspora Station, and I'm very happy to be back. And thank you, Made of Africa. Peace and blessings to you as well.
Yes, peace and blessings. Okay, so as you see, Trump deployed and the American government deployed U.S. troops to Nigeria following the strike that happened last year on, was it Christmas Day? So the move announced by U.S. Africa Command, or AFRICOM, follows the meeting that, of course, as mentioned, was had between President Bola Tinubu and President Trump last year. And so there obviously has been joint cooperation. There's been that request that was made. We are seeing that there has been, it's been met with great pleasure with the authorities and leadership in Nigeria. So we have another video that we'll play with a little bit more insight into how the Nigerian government has been responding to the troops and the strike in the subsequent days. So we'll play that and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Now let's return to that breaking story that I mentioned earlier. Nigeria's First Lady, Oluremi Tinubu, has met President Trump as the country collaborates with the United States to tackle killings by terrorist groups in northern Nigeria. The visit of Mrs. Tinubu may not be unconnected to the moves by the US government to crack down on killings in Christian communities in northern Nigeria. The Nigerian government immediately opened channels of discussion with the US government officials regarding working together to try to stem recurring attacks in some states by targeting with targeted strikes carried out by U.S. forces in Sokoto state.
But we're honored to be joined today by the First Lady of Nigeria, who also happens to serve as a Christian pastor at the largest church in Nigeria, a very respected woman. First Lady, please, where are you? Thank you very much. It's a great honor. Thank you very much. Very respected person, too. Thank you.
All right. So your thoughts on that, Gloria? I will get us back on screen, full screen. So your thoughts on the strike, boots on the ground, and the First Lady's response.
I know Kamala and Biden right now are just like, what happened? In case you don't know, I'll just give you a quick background. So when Niger was invaded, no, not invaded, when that coup happened in Niger, the military coup that removed Mohamed Bazoum in 2020, was it? Yeah, 2023.
Yes.
There was an allyship going on between Nigeria and the US. Of course, Biden and Kamala were in office at the time. And I observed the trend. I observed the shift. There were people who literally, because of that, there are some people, and I'm sure some people will argue this, but there are some people who switched loyalty to Trump because of a move like that, because they felt that there was an allyship between the Nigerian government and Biden and Kamala, and they didn't like that. They felt that because Nigeria had had what some would label a civilian coup, in that the election of 2023 was controversial. They felt that the US coming in to suddenly want to save the day with a military coup happening in Niger, they thought that was hypocritical. And so because of that, some people shifted. I can assure you that some people switched loyalty or decided to camp with Trump as a result of that. So now with what is going on, and after Trump came in, you notice there wasn't that much of an allyship going on between Trump and the Nigerian government. But now there seems to be one. And this is why I say to people, when you support Trump because you think he will come and save Nigeria's election and all that, at the end of the day, it's about business for these people. They're doing loyalty. It's about their bottom line. It's about what serves their interest. They don't care about your rights, as it were, if you know what I mean. But anyway, this move by the US, as we've mentioned repeatedly on this show, there's a lot of influence from China, a lot of influence from Russia. I mean, just recently, China reaffirmed its strategic partnership with Abuja, which is in Nigeria. So now the US, especially with what happened as far as the Sahel is concerned, the US is desperately trying, it seems, to hoist its flag in Nigeria and ensure that there's some kind of partnership. And in this case now, it's security partnership. So, of course, the major trigger was when the US redesignated Nigeria as a country of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act. And that gave them that legal and political justification for the Trump administration to increase its pressure. So now they're linking direct assistance for security. They're linking it directly to the protection of religious minorities. So you see a major shift in bilateral relations. Nigeria has gone from this pressure that we're feeling diplomatically now to collaborating with the US. So I guess if you can't beat them, you join them. And of course, as you mentioned, all this follows the famous Christmas Day airstrike. So the US is no longer just doing remote surveillance. Now you have officials from both Nigeria and the US telling us that, oh no, it's not, the US isn't engaging in direct combat. They're just there to provide technical expertise. And of course, Nigeria, in the interest of national pride, the Nigerian government has framed the entire deployment as occurring at the invitation of the government of Nigeria, and that Nigerian commanders will still have full authority over the operations. But I guess we'll just have to keep watching, because my goodness, what a time to be alive, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, look, a couple of different things, right? You guys might remember that over the last 2 years, the AES has unceremoniously asked the West to leave their countries, or the Federation now is what it's called, of the AES, right? The Alliance of Sahelian States. And so just for context, geography lesson quickly for everyone who is unaware, there's a lot of speculation as to why being in Nigeria matters to America when there's already pretty good diplomatic relations generally. There's already trade agreements generally. But, you know, many of the attacks are happening in northern Nigeria. Where does Nigeria border. If you look to the north, Niger. To the west is Burkina Faso, and also to the west is Mali. These are the three countries where the West no longer has bases. So it makes sense if the United States is thinking about how to be closer to what's happening here, to have boots on the ground here, anywhere here, in this country, so that they could be closer to here. A lot of people are speculating as to why and what that means. But in my opinion, I think, as always, the United States is always going to operate in its own best interest, as every country does. And I think right now they are thinking they need to be watching what's happening in the AES. And I think they have what they feel like is a good enough excuse to be there. You'll notice that the United States generally has to have a reason to be somewhere that they use outside of what later becomes the reason that they're there, right? So you may have seen that in Latin America earlier this year. In fact, they just told you the reason, though. They didn't even hide it that time, right? So in this case, I think that's what we are seeing. I don't know how effective this will be, because there's always been these conversations and alliances and discussions about quelling the forces and stopping the forces from growing, these major forces, right? ISIS aligned, Al-Qaeda aligned groups in northern Nigeria, right? Boko Haram is one of the more popular ones. You guys remember the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. It's all related to these insurgent groups. Under many administrations, the United States has done things like held up pictures saying "Bring Back Our Girls," discussed it, but had never done anything about it. And I think it's because they had never had a need strategically to be there. I think that there's a need strategically to be there now, and that is why I think the United States is there. We'll continue to follow this story to see if, in fact, there's any military assistance. I mean, there are all kinds of videos. We don't share those videos here because one, there's lots of ammunition and things like that, but there are many videos of the amount of funding that these forces have in the north, in northern Nigeria, and they're actually moving to other parts of Nigeria. They're not just in the north, they're going to different places. And it seems that many people aren't incentivized in the current government to do anything to stop the flow of funds and to stop the continued attacks. And so we will see. We will see if this does anything. Being very diplomatic as I can be, considering the circumstances. This is an ongoing story, so we'll continue to watch it. But we just want to make sure you all are aware and what is being speculated by people on the ground and people with knowledge of the matter. Now, with that, we do want to speak to what is actually happening on the ground, because at the same time, although this seems like a distraction and people do maybe not totally understand why the United States would be there, even though they've given their reasons and many people have other speculative reasons, there is some serious situations happening on the ground in Nigeria. And in the last week, nearly 200 people have been unalived by gunmen in a series of attacks in Nigeria. Armed bandits targeted several villages across the states of Kwara and Katsina. Katsina. On Tuesday. Amnesty International says many of the victims were shot at close range and some were actually burnt alive. So we're going to play this video of the response to this and the some of the coverage that's been on the ground there. And then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Preparing to bury the latest victims of Nigeria's wave of killings over the past few months. Villagers shot dead in an attack in the northern state of Katsina. It was one of 3 villages targeted on Wednesday.
The people who raided us, we don't know them. They just stormed our house and we heard gunshots. We went out to his shop and they met my son there. He pleaded with them, but the bandits said no way, we will not spare any man. They went ahead and killed him. I just saw his corpse.
In the western state of Kwara, attackers set shops and homes on fire. The victims included women, children, a traditional leader, and local businessmen. Witnesses say the attackers showed no mercy as they moved from house to house and into nearby fields.
The attackers followed them, tied their hands and shot them. We received support from the government and eventually soldiers arrived to evacuate the bodies to our local government headquarters in Tofoki.
The army has been deployed to the area, with confirmation from Abuja that a team of US troops are also assisting with intelligence and training. These latest attacks come after armed gunmen kidnapped dozens of worshippers from 2 churches in central Nigeria 2 weeks ago.
I ran away because I saw them. I was very, very afraid for seeing them. They gathered all the people, both the 2 churches, and then carried them away. That was what I saw.
Last year, attackers stormed 2 churches in Kaduna State, seizing its members during services, prompting Donald Trump to threaten U.S. military action.
All right, this video is a little longer, but just in the interest of time. Now, you notice that they mentioned the U.S. troops and also the Nigerian troops came after the attack to carry the bodies away. And to offer some, I guess, some intelligence and some training. But your thoughts, Gloria, on this particular attack and the response?
Yeah, of course, this only strengthens the case of the U.S., unfortunately, as far as, you know, its reason for that designation on Nigeria as a country of particular interest or concern, because you know, it's yet another justification for the U.S. sending its troops over to Nigeria. What I find especially saddening is the fact that one of the unalivings that occurred was done as a vindictive move, simply because somebody had alerted authorities that these people, because sometimes, and this is why I say the Nigerian government knows something we don't know, because often they would send a message and say, we're coming. Can you imagine the effrontery that would make a group of people send a message even before showing up? And they take their time. So when all the unaliving is going on, it's calm. Like, they take their time. Like, where does that ever happen? So for somebody to have sent a message, clearly it was somebody from among that group that got the info that, hey, they've alerted authorities, be careful. So they went there as a form of vengeance and unalived people en masse. So that lets you know that, again, the government knows something that we don't know. And when people are suspicious and raising questions and saying there are certain powerful people that are funding these activities, I mean, this is what makes you think that for real. I mean, this kind of certifies or confirms those suspicions. It's so unfortunate, and this is why I'm very careful. I don't like to dismiss, oh, is it a Christian genocide or is it not? Again, we don't have enough data, but one thing I will say is that there's been a lot of attention on these, and you know, at the end of the day, all I can hope for is that the energy that the Nigerian government spends on trying to do great PR and get all these great compliments from the US, I hope they put that same energy towards securing the people, because in a case like this, authorities were actually alerted. If anything, authorities should have been there to ensure that these people are safe. And that did not happen. Those people were there for hours, unaliving those people. And then the government wants to act after the fact. It's like medicine after an unalivement. Where does that ever happen? I can only hope that the government will eventually help resolve this.
Yeah, and so additional thoughts I have. You know, obviously this is a tragedy, and to me, I think what always confuses me with a situation like this is you have large delegations of troops working together in the countries just north of you. And from all accounts, they're having some successes against these similar types of groups. Why go all the way to America to ask for intelligence and help when you can go to the country north of you fighting the same group from the opposite end, right? Because it's all in that same region. They're fighting it from this way, you're fighting it from this way. Why wouldn't you work with them? Instead of, you know, threatening to send military forces there because you didn't like that they had a coup or a revolution that was a change in government. I mean, to me, it makes absolutely no sense that you would go thousands of miles away when you can go less than a couple hundred miles away to work with a partner who understands almost as much as you or as much as you, the people that you're fighting, right? The people here know what you tell them. You're coming to the United States to ask for help based on information that you give them, so then they can tell you how to get more information to give to them. So then they can, because they're not going to help you do anything. So to me, it doesn't make any sense. I would really like to see, like, just like when we talk about trade on the continent, I'd like to see like joint defense forces work together. And all that money that flows through these countries, they may need to spend a little bit more money on paying military personnel and for weapons to ensure that they don't get paid off to not go do anything, right? Because this is not going to stop, right? And it seems to be like a problem that's going to continue to grow. And the solutions that are in place seem to be the same solutions that have been in place, which caused coups in 4 countries in West Africa. Okay, I will say that I'll leave it there. It is just frustrating to kind of see that the continued reliance on the West to do something that has not been done thus far with any leader thus far. They keep, we all know what the definition of insanity is. And so it just seems to be doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And I don't expect to see any different results. The people who are getting different results are people who did something different, and that's the AES. So I believe that they should be partnering with the AES on working strategically to stop what is happening. Okay, with that, there is another story of an American missionary who his name is Alex Barber, speaks out against what he saw as violent attacks in a couple of different states in Nigeria. And he called attention to displacement, prosecution, insecurity there. And what it speaks to is the fact that he was was told how much funds were going to be required to assist in this program. Seems to be overinflated numbers. And this kind of speaks to whether or not people really want something done, or if they really want something done, put it that way. I won't say what the alternative could potentially be. So let's play this video and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
I had to go to the humanitarian commissioner and I let them know of my desire here, what I'm supposed to do. And I was directed that I'm not allowed to build the market. They said that the government has plans to build the market. And they said, we'll send you the plan tomorrow, maybe 2 days. And I waited over 2 weeks, no response. And I'm pressuring, I'm asking, so what is happening? When are we going to build the market? You said you would send me the plan. I have no plan. And they sent me a video of a 300 million plan for a market in Yawara. While they told me I can't build, I would spend maybe 50 or 60 million to rebuild everything. And they would consider a 300 million market here in Yawara. I said, what market in any village or town is there that is worth 300 million in Nigeria? Not one. Zero. Even in cities, which city has 300 million market? Very few. And I said I would not partake in this. Because my personal opinion is that people are using funds that are meant for the persecuted, the afflicted. Christian or Muslim, it doesn't even matter. People are suffering in Nigeria.
All right, so for context, the 300 million, if you just do the quick math, it's about $300,000. It's in that range, just so people can understand what the dollar amount is. You know, some people are saying this, some people feel like this is not real, but I mean, I think it's been confirmed, I think, by many news outlets that he was attempting to do what he was attempting to do. That's what they're saying. At least that's what's being reported. But your thoughts, Gloria, on this particular story and what's been happening with this guy who's apparently trying to see if he can help build a market to help bolster the economy there locally.
Yeah, and whether or not this is actually confirmed, the truth is there are Nigerians who actually believe it wholeheartedly, because there are just certain things that happen as far as corruption is concerned that some would not find shocking. A story like this, it sounds about right, unfortunately, when you're speaking about governance in really not just Nigeria, you know, throughout Africa. Money determines a lot and exposes a lot. But this outcry, it's extremely sensitive, because obviously the US government has a high-level mission that they recently launched in Nigeria, and Congressman Riley Moore actually led that. So using reports of obstructed aid and persecution in the Middle Belt actually does justify that country of particular concern designation and the recent military strikes that have happened in Nigeria. And for you to have a high-profile American missionary being blocked by a local government, reportedly or allegedly, actually provides immediate political ammunition for US lawmakers that are currently drafting the Nigeria Religious Freedom and Accountability Act of 2026. So at the end of the day, however you want to look at it, it's just not great optics, unfortunately, even if it's not true. There are people who will absolutely run with this, and this just keeps strengthening that case. I mean, these are stories now, because there's a lot of attention on Nigeria. These are stories that are not just trending in Nigeria, they're trending globally.
Yeah, and I'll say this, right? To your point about people not being surprised about this, those of us who spent a significant amount of time in West Africa and are familiar with NGOs, nonprofits that are there, there are going to be, and just in general, right, the prices are overinflated for those foreigners who come to the country, no matter what it is. And there's a belief system that they have it so we can take advantage of it, right? So sometimes you might 3x the price, 4x the price, whether it's aid or anything else. And it happens at all levels of society, right? You go and shop from the local market person, they're going to tell you something is worth $15 when most of the time it's worth $5. Or you go to a level at this level, whoever he's saying he's talking to, and you get told something is 300 million where maybe it is 80 million naira. And so, yeah, I mean, this is just a part of what you can expect. I think one of the other things that, having gone through some of the files that have been released, apparently you can't say the name of those files, but a person who had spent some time in Africa, who spent some time in Israel, who spent some time with the current president and former presidents in the United States, who was unalived in a jail cell. One of the things that people do is they take advantage of tragic moments and tragic situations. And that's when many of the elite and powerful tend to make the most money, because there is money that floods in for specific events, occasions to help out. And, they act as filters of that funding and get it before it reaches its intended target and use case. So, what we're talking about here seems a lot like what we saw during the global sickness or, Ebola before that, and all other, financial crises and all kinds of other things that have happened. So, I'm not shocked or surprised by that particular story, or if that's the case that's happened, because we see this happen a lot. And so anyway, we'll keep our eye on the situation. We wanted to just kind of share that story as part of it, just because we have been hearing a lot about this particular story. And we did want to give some context as to what we've seen and heard about and learned about from, the different reporting that we have access to and that we've been reading and watching. Okay, with that, I do want to move on to Libya, which is another story of the Western involvement over the years. That's a conversation for a whole nother time as to what Libya was before the U.S. involvement in the was it 2012, 2011, in that time frame, to what it is now. It is a completely different country. So anyway, let me get to, we'll play this video and get to the other side, but I want to give some context before we play this video. So Libya faces a new wave of political uncertainty following the assassination of Saif Gaddafi, which is Muammar Gaddafi's son. He's obviously, you know, a very well-known figure on the continent, very polarizing figure globally, not so much on the continent though. He was unalived at his home last week. He was a deeply polarizing figure who commanded significant loyalty in strongholds in certain parts of the country. Despite a 2015 war crimes conviction, and which complicated his political ambitions, many viewed him as a contender for the presidency. So his unalivement arrives at the precarious moment as the nation prepares for a long-delayed presidential and parliamentary elections scheduled for mid-April 2026. While his detractors remember his vow of rivers of blood, which he said during the 2011 uprising, his supporters view him as a martyred reformer who offered a path to stability. So his loyalists blame rival factions for the unaliving. Experts wonder if his removal from the quote-unquote political power play will clear an electoral path for or further plunge the divided nation into chaos. And if you guys aren't aware, I may have mentioned this before, and I should probably mention it here before we get into the video. Well, you know what? Actually, let's get into the video. I'll give you my thoughts on the other side.
Our next story is from Libya. Late dictator Muammar Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, is dead. He was shot dead at his home last week while he was trying to escape assassination attempts. He never held a political title, but his death could change the country's election roadmap. Now, Gaddafi's followers have called his killing an assassination. Thousands of them came together to mourn his death. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi was buried last week in Bani Walid. It is a town that still holds allegiance to Libya's late dictator.
All right, so your thoughts, Gloria, on this unaliving of Gaddafi's son?
Yeah, so just a quick background. Following his capture in November 2011, while he was attempting to flee to Niger, Saif spent over a decade as a ghost in the Libyan political system. And then in absentia, he was actually sentenced to unalivement by a Tripoli court in 2015. They said it was for war crimes, but he was later granted amnesty by the Zintan-based militia that actually held him. Now, his reemergence in 2021 to announce his presidential candidacy was actually appealing to Libyans and I'm sure a lot of Africans, because Libyans are clearly exhausted by 15 years of civil war, the economic collapse that's been going on, and of course, foreign intervention. But what has happened now has marked the end of a political era in Libya. It's removed a significant figure from a landscape that is clearly deeply fractured. And as the second son and once presumed heir of the late Muammar Gaddafi, Saif al-Islam's death, or unalivement, I'm sorry, actually happened. And I'm sure some people know why we have to use these words. It's so that we can ensure that, you know, our videos get the reach they deserve to get. But anyway, this unalivement actually happened just months before it was expected to run in, I think it was April of this year. They're supposed to be having their presidential elections. And definitely, I mean, it's obvious that this was calculated and this was a professional unaliving of this man at his residence in Zintan. And he had been in confinement, as it were, since his capture in 2011. So reportedly, 4 masked gunmen had to have infiltrated his high security compound after disabling the surveillance system. And reports indicate that his security guards had actually been withdrawn approximately 90 minutes before that assault happened. So of course, now this is fueling speculation that this was an inside job, because the attackers have had intimate knowledge of his security protocols. And while the Public Prosecution Office has launched an official probe, no group has claimed responsibility, but there are suspicions linked to either the Eastern Forces of Khalifa Haftar or the Tripoli-based Government of National Unity, both of whom actually stood to lose politically from, a Gaddafi electoral victory that could have happened in April.
Yeah, I mean, look, how do I discuss this? So, growing up in the United States, right, you hear Western media discuss Gaddafi. Spending 4 years living on the continent and many years traveling before that and now after, you talk to people who are from Libya and who talk about the country before and after. And I might have mentioned this before, but I have a staff that worked for my uncle's family. And he was trying to go to Europe, and he was told that he can go through Libya to get to Europe. There was, he was captured, he was held for ransom. They called the family and, basically said, if you don't give us money, we will unalive him. One family member sent the money, he was unalived anyway, right? And that is the state of affairs in the country, not to mention all the other human trafficking that is happening there. I want to give some context as to why so many people held Gaddafi in high regard, especially after his unaliving, when you see what the country looks like before and after, quote unquote, freedom and the unaliving of Gaddafi Sr., and why there was so much hope maybe for Gaddafi, the younger Gaddafi, I want to say senior, sorry, Muammar Gaddafi versus Saif Gaddafi. So you can see the top picture. I don't know if you could really see this well, but this is basically saying before, it's hard to see, before and then after, right? And this is what we're talking about in this country. And this is after so-called freedom and the Western's involvement in the country. So you could see why people were holding on to hope that even though he was a ghost of a political figure and potentially had announced his political ambitions, that people were looking to him as potentially the next potential leader of the country to help get them out of a situation like what you see on screen here. Obviously, he's been unalived, and so now we will see what happens in the country's political future. But as you mentioned, it's been a 15-year civil war over the resources, which in fact the West has much control over. And so we will just continue to watch to see what happens in the country after what unfortunately happened in the years of 2011 and around that time. Okay, so moving on to maybe a more positive story, considering all the stories we've been covering today have been tough to talk about. So moving on to the AES, which of course everybody's always asking about. So we have some news from there. So Ibrahim Traore has led Burkina Faso to record gold output, achieving 94 tons in 2025, the highest in the country's history. The turnaround follows a decline due to instability from what people say are recent coups, which apparently had scared off investors previously. And the government is tightening control over the mining sector, raising profit shares from foreign companies and nationalizing 5 gold mines, which means that money goes back to the country. So Burkina Faso ownership is meant to increase with plans for 10 new semi-mechanized mines led by local investors in 2026. As gold becomes vital for funding state functions, the new approach aligns with the broader resource nationalization strategy and challenges from sanctions and security threats. And just know that the price of gold has gone way up in the last 12 to 24 months. So as they continue to take on their own natural resources, the expectation is that it will continue to increase in value and be more valuable and allow for more to be done on behalf of the country. So with that, we'll play this video and then we'll have some commentary on the others.
Kwara has led Burkina Faso to its biggest gold year on record, 94 tons in 2025, the highest output in the country's history. Now, the new numbers mark dramatic turnaround for a sector that was in retreat just 3 years ago. After back-to-back coups and political uncertainty that scared off investors, and officials credit the success to sweeping reforms in what the government calls economic sovereignty. The biggest shift is control of the state over these gold mines. The state has expanded its direct stake in major gold projects, and 5 gold mines have been nationalized. They are now under direct state control. Now, this is part of a broader push known as resource nationalism, and it is spreading across the Sahel. Analysts say that the record gold output of Burkina Faso sends a clear signal. Despite coups, sanctions, and a worsening security environment, the state has increased production and tightened control over who benefits from its gold. The real test will come if prices fall or if violence escalates. But for now, it is reshaping power and quietly positioning Burkina Faso as a mining heavyweight in the Sahel.
All right, so your thoughts on that story, Gloria?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Before I go further, can I give a shout out to First Post? Because First Post is one of the few outlets that has actually covered this story. First Post is based in India, by the way. There's a video that went viral. It's pinned on Joe's profile at authentic_African on Instagram, and I think everywhere, I don't know. But on my page at the Gloria Ayo, you'll see that video that went viral last year when the whole, the world stood up for the AES, specifically Burkina Faso, when there were threats seemingly made, towards Ibrahim Traore. Mm-hmm. In that video, we talked about the fact that you're just supposed to cover the story. When it's negative, we see Traore in the news as far as Western media is concerned. When something like this happens, you rarely find people covering it. Again, you are supposed to just cover the story. And that's why a platform like what Joe has created is so essential, because who else is going to tell our stories accurately? So shout out to First Post for covering this, because we're tired of seeing this man just being painted negatively. And back to the conversation we've always had about those who have reservations against the military taking over. Well, with the civilian taking over, what has really changed? What has actually improved? If all they did was even maintain what they met, it would be better. I mean, we might not even have much to complain about, but unfortunately, our situations seem to get progressively worse. And of all continents on earth, it should not be Africa. So I'm happy to see something like this coming out of Burkina Faso. I mean, do we even understand the impact of this? To have generated over $4 billion in export revenue, reportedly in 2025 alone, is worth screaming about. That should be on every single platform on earth. So the moral of the story is, if they're not doing it, we don't need to wait on anyone to tell our stories. We take our own power and share the greatness that is coming out of Burkina Faso. We don't do embellishing. I don't like when people, paint, exaggerate some of the achievements. We don't need to do that, because what he's doing already speaks for itself. I mean, they're doing great work. And this is what it's always been about. This is why people support this man, because it's really more about us taking control of our own resources. And with what has happened, keep in mind, there have been sanctions against Burkina Faso. Keep in mind that aid has been suspended in Burkina Faso. What does this all prove? We don't need anyone coming to save us. We have all it takes. This is what I've always screamed about. So yay for Burkina Faso, yay for Traore.
Absolutely. And I will just add to that, I was corrected when I used to call it a coup. Right, I used to call these a coup, and it was corrected at one point in time that said it's not a coup if everybody in the country wants it and needs it. It's a revolution, yes. Right? And and that's what they're describing the AES as. What's really important is not only what he's doing for his country, but how he's given a frame of reference for how to run a country to ensure that the resources go back to the people that it comes from. So one of the things that I hear a lot from people when I'm in Ghana, when I'm in Sierra Leone, because that's the places I've been to the most since Ibrahim Traore has taken over, and since really all of what's happened in the AES from 2022 till now, is that they always say, we wish we had a president like Traore. We pray to God for a president like Traore. People say that all the time. And because they can see specific things that he's doing to benefit his country. It's not just rhetoric, it's action, right? And I think that it's, I think what this will do is lead to a new class of politicians who actually focus on these kinds of things, because it's eventually going to be required to win, right? To not only say what you're going to do, but do it, and take some of these policies and apply them. So it's not going to happen right away, right? But as he continues to keep having more wins, and there's more that we share these kinds of stories, you guys watching, sharing this with people that you know, and we continue to push these kinds of stories, the more we can see the rest of the continent in areas where they need to adopt these kinds of policies, begin to adopt these kinds of policies. So yeah, I wanted to make sure, of course, that we did cover this story, because there were a lot of stories to cover this week. Gloria found a lot of stories to cover, and there was a lot. And so we had to figure out.
You found a lot too. You found a lot too.
Yeah. So yeah, so this is an important one, because obviously there are some things happening on the continent that we're not so happy about, and we just want to make sure everybody's aware about them. But then we also want to make sure people are aware about this as well. And so yeah, so we'll continue to share these kinds of stories as we see them. And you're right, shout out to First Post, and obviously in one of the videos somebody complained that they mentioned Gaddafi as a dictator. They're using the words that they have access to describe leaders in the continent. And they, obviously, I'm not sure that they were as supportive of Gaddafi, those who were editors of First Post, as maybe many Africans might have been, right? So, but at the end of the day, at the very least, they're sharing the stories and having Africa focused as a non-continental news outlet. And so, it's helpful to have access to these stories, and so that we can make sure that we can synthesize the ones that we think are important to you all, so that we can share them with you all. All right. In the interest of time, I think we can get to one or two more stories, and then maybe we can quickly run through the news from around the world. So again, another First Post story. And this is an interesting one, because this is Russia accusing France, particularly Macron, and the Ukraine of quote unquote sponsoring terror in Africa. Now, this isn't the first of its kind in terms of a claim like this. There have been claims like this made by the leaders of the AES. If I'm not mistaken, at least two of the three, if not all three, have verbally stated that they felt that was the case. So we'll give you some context, and then we'll play the video. So there's been some tension between, obviously, Moscow and Paris, and it's reached new heights as Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, or the SVR, accused French President Emmanuel Macron of orchestrating what he called neo-colonial coups to destabilize Africa. Now, Moscow claims the French administration is seeking political revenge for its waning influence in the Sahel, allegedly teaming up with insurgent groups and the Ukrainian regime to eliminate, quote unquote, undesirable leaders that would be undesirable to the Ukraine specifically, and to France. The report details allegations made by Russia, including French involvement in a foiled unaliving attempt of Ibrahim Traore and attacks on fuel supplies in Mali. Moscow asserts that Paris, having lost its grip on nations like Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso to pro-Russian leaders, is now sponsoring chaos to reinstall pro-Western regimes. So we'll play some a little bit from this video from First Post News' reporting on this, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
And moving on to our next story, Russia is a key security ally of many African nations, especially the ones in the Sahel. Now, it has made a big accusation against the ex-colonial ruler France. Moscow has accused French President Emmanuel Macron of teaming up with terrorists to destabilize Africa. The Russian intelligence has released a whole statement targeting Macron. Moscow has accused Paris of preparing neo-colonial coups to destabilize the African continent. The statement said, and I quote, Emmanuel Macron's administration is feverishly seeking opportunities for political revenge in Africa.
Whether inspired by the American operation to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, or imagining himself as the arbiter of the fate of African peoples, Macron has authorized his special services to launch a plan to eliminate undesirable leaders in Africa.
All right, so you guys get the idea. Gloria, your thoughts on this reporting? Oh, I think you're on mute.
My bad, Joe. We keep hearing about Macron, in these very unflattering allegations. It's not today that we've heard of allegations against Emmanuel Macron, allegedly sponsoring these things in order to regain the lost influence in Africa. And this has now become like a dangerous escalation when you have Russia, putting these allegations out there. So it's basically escalated things now as far as the tension between Moscow and Paris. And now the battleground for all of this is Sahel. Sahel is caught in the global power dynamics, which once again shows you, and I reiterate 1000%, the importance, the value that Africa has. We need to first know who we are and what we carry. You think these people really have time to be fighting over Africa if we didn't have treasure that they need access to? But anyway, the allegations against the Macron administration keeps going on. There are allegations that they've authorized intelligence operations to eliminate undesirable leaders who have pivoted towards Russia or maybe China or wherever else. Moscow specifically identified Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta of Mali, and even the new leadership in Madagascar as targets for French-backed destabilization. Why this is, like the story I referenced earlier in Nigeria about how certain things, even if we don't have the facts to prove it or we doubt, how valid those stories are, some of these things become believable because of trends and patterns. In this particular instance, historically, we know that France has not necessarily wanted the best for the African countries that it's colonized. The CFA franc is still very much active in, I think, 14 countries on the continent. So France has never actually proven that it's a worthy ally of Africans. So when stories like this come out, people take everything and they believe whoever is making the allegations just because of the patterns, because of the antecedents. So yeah, here we are.
Yes, and so, look, I think we have to be very clear. There are a lot of people who use a lot of propaganda to push different agendas. So two things can be true. Sometimes people in the Far East use propaganda to destabilize things happening in the West and in Africa, right? Including sometimes Russia. Also, sometimes the West does the same. That does not necessarily mean that this is not true. So we haven't seen the proof of this. We have just heard what they said, but there has been a pattern, and at the very least, we do know this. About 2 years ago, we reported on the fact that the Ukraine foreign intelligence did give insight into a anti-Mali leader, right? Assimi Goïta is the leader of Mali, right? Anti-Goïta group gave him information that unalived a number of soldiers from the Mali army. And they actually admitted to it publicly, like the Ukraine admitted to that publicly. So it's not a far stretch for what this foreign intelligence or group from that Russia is saying, right? Now, when it comes to France, they haven't necessarily admitted things publicly. They've just had a lot of rhetoric about their discontent for the current leadership in the AES. much of the uranium and natural resources used to make sure that France has light comes from the AES. And so there definitely is a special interest for France in this particular region, and to have more control over the minerals and the resources that are there, to be able to continue to enjoy light and life as they do in France. Having been there recently, I can tell you there's decadence and opulence. I was in Cannes. It's, you know, it's interesting how that whole country was built on the resources that come from their former colonized states. All right, so moving on to one final story, and I do have, we can go over by a little bit, by the way, Gloria. So I'll just, we have one more story that we wanted to share with you all, and this is in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's president has defended his government's controversial land reforms at the World Governments Summit. He said the seizure of farms from white owners was necessary to reclaim colonial-era land and assert national independence, even though it led to decades of international sanctions. The discussion also covered Zimbabwe's economic challenges, compensation promises to displaced farmers, and ongoing efforts to clear debt and restore global financial support. The land issue remains central to Zimbabwe's politics, economic recovery, and foreign relations. So we will play this video and have some commentary on the other side.
What happens when land, history, and power collide? Today, that question is back in the global spotlight, as Zimbabwe's president defends one of Africa's most controversial decisions, the seizure of land from white farmers and the rewriting of land ownership after colonial rule. Zimbabwe's president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, has strongly defended his country's controversial land reforms, saying the seizure of farms owned predominantly by white Zimbabwean commercial farmers from white colonial-era owners was necessary for independence, even if it led to years of international sanctions.
Zimbabwe has been under sanctions for decades as a result of us claiming our land from the British and making ourselves independent. We seized the land and gave it to our people. So sanctions were imposed on us. But in spite of all that constraint we have developed, and we are happy that we have developed on our own, and we feel very independent.
He said the land reforms were about reversing colonial injustice and restoring ownership to Zimbabweans.
All right, so your thoughts, Gloria, on this story?
Yeah, I found two things very interesting in this whole story. First of all, the meaningful, what I call a meaningful cultural critique that Mnangagwa actually shared, which was that those white farmers who stayed in Zimbabwe were those who were willing to live on the same basis as Black Zimbabweans, and those who felt superior chose to leave. I thought that was really important. I also found it very interesting when he said that the international sanctions that Zimbabwe had received were not as a result of human rights abuses, but as the price of independence. And he asserted that Zimbabwe has developed, even with all those constraints, and they remain very happy to feel very independent. All this reaffirms the ruling ZANU-PF's commitment to the land reform program. They see it as the ultimate pillar of national sovereignty. And reclaiming that land from British colonists, I mean, clearly was not a racial act. And this is what Mnangagwa is saying. I'm not necessarily a big fan of his policies or so. I mean, he's been in the news now for wanting to extend his term. And I'm not necessarily a big fan. Let me just make that clear. But there are certain things that I do agree with. And, you know, saying that this was not racial, this was really about restoration. I'm 100% with him on this one, and very necessary for them to actually achieve genuine independence And this is all with the backdrop of decades of international sanctions that have been triggered by this. So yay for Zimbabwe. This is all land. Let's make it very clear. This is basically a case where they're returning land that actually belonged to Zimbabweans. This land belonged to the people to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that it is a very controversial topic, right? I mean, there are many folks who feel like, you know, they should not have seized that land back. But at the end of the day, it was their land and it was taken by all kinds of means. And so, yes, and they've been under sanctions because of it. And as you mentioned, it wasn't because of human rights violations. It was because they decided to take things into their own hands, power into their own hands, and make a change. And that was obviously with the predecessor of the current president. And as you mentioned, there are other things that we can be disputing and disagree on as it pertains to current policies and how things are continuing to remain the same after so many years in power. But two things can be true. That interview, by the way, went viral. You guys might remember Tucker Carlson's a very polarizing individual, to say the least. And he was asking questions that were for a specific audience. And those guys met with him. I'm not 100% sure if they knew why he was saying what he was saying and for who, the questions he was asking. But with that aside, I do think that he answered that question well, because at the end of the day, I think that it's something that maybe they have to figure out another way to do it, but there are other places on the continent that need to have similar policies to be enacted. You know, maybe have lease terms for the land that has been seized, and those people figure out how to either buy it back from the country, and maybe that money goes back to the families it was seized from, and or to the government some way. But I think there should be some policies enacted. And I think, again, with these kinds of things, the more you see them, the more iterations of them that can become possible. And then we can see how we can make that impact in other places, namely South Africa is what I'm talking about. Anyway, so those are the main stories that we wanted to cover for this week. There were a lot, as mentioned earlier, of stories that happened in the last 2 weeks, because we didn't go live last week because I was traveling, I think. Yes, I was in Miami last week. So that was the reason why we were not able to go live. But I do want to talk to some of the stories that we did plan to cover, some of the important ones. So on the topic of the U.S. troops in Nigeria, well, the U.S. is planning to send an envoy to Mali to quote unquote challenge Putin's influence in the Sahel. So Nick Checker, head of the U.S. Bureau of African Affairs, is engaging Mali's military-led government to reassess quote unquote counterterrorism cooperation. Obviously, Russia had strengthened its ties with the Sahelian states, notably, you know, that's Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, who've obviously shifted towards Moscow and amid a wave of recent revolutions. And the U.S. seeks to a conditional return, quote unquote, focused on democracy. Any thoughts on that story? And the U.S.'s involvement in the Sahel region now, or attempting to be involved in the Sahel region, specifically Mali at this point?
I guess they do listen to This Week in Africa with Joe Otagwa and Gloria Ayo, because we did tell them, you know, when all the threats were being made and sanction this, sanction that, and we said, bro, you're opening the gates wide open for Russia, Turkey, China to come take over the continent. So now they're like, let's find strategic ways. You know, we can use security as a way to get us in there. We're here to fight for the people. At the end of the day, everybody's protecting their interests. Africa, you have all it takes. This is yet another proof that you have all it takes to be self-sufficient. Once we have the right governments in power, you'll see Africa fly. They know what is in there. It's just that, unfortunately, some of us don't.
Yeah, and I like to use analogs. I always use analogs to talk about things, So, there's been many people who haven't sold their companies when people have come to them and said, I want to buy your company for $10 million. There's famously, Mark Zuckerberg turned down $10 million from Bill Gates. I know, crazy names. I know. But just remember, I'm using this as an analog. Turned down the $10 billion because he said, well, if you're offering me $10 billion, what is my company actually worth? Think about how many people are interested in Africa. What is it actually worth? And I think once we realize how much it's worth, and we actually ensure that the people of the continent receive the benefits of it, I think there'll be more joint progress and work with each other, intercontinental trade and defense pacts, etc. So we'll see what happens in these conversations. I don't think they will go too far, right? Considering the rhetoric that's come out of the AES, but I'm interested to see how it goes. So we'll be following that. One other story that you brought to my attention is that a court orders UK to pay 420 pounds over the 1949 coal mine unalivings in Nigeria. It's a developing story really about some kind of like truth and reconciliation. Any background or thoughts you can give on that particular story?
Yes. Basically, these miners in 1949 who were working for Britain were fighting for their rights. Well, not even fighting. They were protesting peacefully for their rights. And the UK administration, now keep in mind the World War II had just happened. So they were desperate to rebuild. And that was why they went to Enugu, which is known for coal in Nigeria. And the miners simply asked, please just pay us. Some of them were not even getting paid. And they opened fire on them, unalived 21, some accounts say more. And now, decades later, because unfortunately, some of you probably never even heard this story, even our government did not follow up on this. And now finally, there seems to be some ray of hope for the families of these people. The UK has not responded. Well, the UK has said, this wasn't brought to their attention, so we don't even know if they will pay. But this is the story so far. I plan to drop a video on this later on today, so follow me at the Gloria Ayo for the full story.
There it is. Yeah, make sure you pay attention to that because that's going to be really important. So Senegal, unfortunately, there was a couple things happening. There was a deadly crackdown at a university, and also separately from that, police had arrested 14 people in a French-run child abuse network in Senegal. Thoughts before I give my own?
Yeah, so let me start with the great, the kudos to them for cracking down on that. People coming to the continent thinking they can do what they can. Joe and I talked about how, this reminds us of what happened with the Sand people in Namibia and how the government cracked down on the man who was going there taking photos of these children that were innocent. And it was just very unfortunate, just exploiting the people. And same thing is going on here, obviously, in Senegal. So I'm very proud and very happy that the government is cracking down on that. On the other hand, the situation with the students is very heartbreaking. Many of us who were rooting for Diomaye Faye, I was one of those people, and Usman Sonko, we were rooting for them so we wouldn't be dealing with things like this. And to see that coming out of Senegal is very disappointing. What I want to see from Senegal, I want to see great things. I want to see more crackdowns. I want to see Senegal, maximizing and leveraging and attaining its full potential. We're not trying to see these kinds of things that just remind us of past administrations, because how are you really different?
Yeah, I kind of made it confusing because I talked about two different stories at once. But yeah, so one story, just for context, is at a school in Senegal. At least one university student was unalived. He was a second-year medical student after severe blood loss. The student association says he was locked inside his dorm and tortured before left critically injured. And so it sparked widespread outrage, video circulating online of police entering the university compounds, firing tear gas at the center of the unrest. Basically, it was about longstanding grievances with, the school and students in poor families can't access the same education from those in wealthier backgrounds. And so a clash basically ensued, and the police had a crackdown on what seemed to be mostly peaceful protesters. So that was the one story that Gloria is talking about in terms of the disappointment with the current government. And then the secondary story is the 14 French arresting the 14 French, whatever, the 14 arrested in the French-run child abuse network. Let me just make sure I say that clearly. So, you know, so kudos to them, as you said, for actually doing that arrest. Because one of the things that we've seen on the continent is that people go there to do the worst kinds of things they wouldn't do elsewhere, right? Or that they do in emerging markets. And you find that many families allow for this kind of abuse of children because there's a hope that this person will financially be able to take care of that child and the family as well. And so you're taking full advantage of people who are desperate. And I think if we see more of what the AES has been doing in terms of getting money back into the hands of the people who deserve it, getting people to work, then they wouldn't be so desperate and wouldn't have to allow for people to do certain things like this. And more of these kind of rings would be stopped and disallowed and disavowed. And so we hope to see them stop more of these. And then on the topic of making change in country, you know, we hope to see that because, you know, both Faye and his mentor were both very much known for their stances against the previous government, and they protested. And actually, his mentor was arrested and wasn't allowed to run, which is why he's not currently the leader of the party and why he's not currently the president of the country. And so I hope that, you know, this wasn't at their direction, and that, you know, it happened, you know, in an isolated incident with, you know, specific police, and that they are going to take care of this and make sure that it doesn't happen again. But, you know, we just hope that they don't turn into the people that they were protesting against when they were not in office. Yeah, there are many people in the Senegalese diaspora who are disappointed with the current leadership. I will say I've heard that from many folks that I speak to here in the States, because, you know, there are many of them in the States. All right, we'll do one or two more stories, and then the rest of the stories are in the description. You guys can check out. So Ebert Taylor's passing, any thoughts on that and who he was in terms of high life and his musical influence?
Yeah, so he was, I mean, not just even in Ghana, he was highly influential in West Africa as far as, you know, high life and Afro beats concerned. So this is in a way the end of an era for African music. This was a visionary guitarist. He was a composer. He was an arranger. And just, I think about a week ago, about a month ago, he had celebrated turning 90. And they were actually working towards launching the Ebert Taylor musical festival in Accra. I hope they can keep, you know, that going. But this is a man who's not only been mourned in Ghana or even West Africa. This is a man who's been mourned globally because of the impact he made. So thank you so much, Ebert Taylor.
Absolutely. We would not have who we have, all who we enjoy today in Afro beats, if not for people like him. Yes. All right, Starlink, shut out of South Africa, but opening up in Senegal. It's a tough one because
Elon Musk news a lot, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah. Elon Musk is in the news a lot. Elon Musk is Elon Musk. However, this speaks to the desperation of the people on the ground for better connectivity. You know, like the fact that people hold their nose and pay for Elon Musk's service shows how bad it is. And in this year, 2026, it should not be that difficult. You guys know when I'm online in Ghana, or when I'm online in Sierra Leone, and even when I have my Zoom calls with the staff I have in Nigeria, network. We always network. It's lagging, you know, and it's like, you know, you pay $60+ per month for the network, and you can pay over 100 if you really have the funds, but it doesn't improve it that much, right? You know, I mean, I have some challenges with the network where I am right now in New York City, but you know, we expect it to work. You kind of take it for granted when you're living in the West, and when you get to some parts of West Africa and you can't barely upload a video, download a video, watch a video, communicate via these kinds of calls, it makes it difficult to do any kind of work and all kinds of other things. And so many people are adopting Starlink because it operates at speeds much higher than the local companies. They don't want to, they'd rather not. These are people who are opposed to Elon Musk in so many different ways, but it is the best option currently. And so South Africa refused it because of the rhetoric that he had with South Africa and, you know, all the things that have been going on there. But at the end of the day, West African countries are like, well, we're not South Africa. And it's available today in Ghana for sure, Sierra Leone for sure. Looks like Senegal is going to make it available. And I hear that Nigeria is opening up if it's not already available there. Officially or unofficially, because not always do the governments approve it. Like it was available in Sierra Leone before the government of Sierra Leone approved its services. So there are countries where some people access Starlink. They can bring it from another country and utilize it there. But anyway, your thoughts on this Starlink story?
I don't know why the first thing that came to my mind was when Faye was asking Trump, wow, you've made the world so peaceful. How do you do it? So clearly there's been some softening and some allyship going on. I mean, and Trump is not far from Elon. So I don't have a problem with, you know what I mean? It's business, technological advancement. Unfortunately, sometimes because we're not where we need to be as a continent, sometimes we do have to get stuff from the outside. It's just sad. But I just find it very ironic that there was a crackdown in 2023 when they said it was a matter of digital sovereignty and national sovereignty. And they were being very cautious and they clamped down on Starlink's terminals and all that. And then suddenly Faye has had a change of mind and is like, oh, well, the fiber optic deployment, is too slow for rural inclusion. So let's bring in Starlink. All that time you could have actually developed your own because it's all about being self-sufficient. But, I guess the people need good coverage and I'm glad you gave the context on that one. But yeah, yay, Faye, man, you're falling my hand. You're falling my hand. I don't go lie, give you. They fall my hand, go. But anyway, go ask your Nigerian friend what that means. What I just said. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, all right. So I think that will be the last story we cover today. We are over time by quite a bit, but we wanted to make sure we went through some of those stories from around the continent since we had some time. Thank you all who've been on and really been engaged throughout. Thank you, Gloria. For those of you who want to support, the best way to support is hit that thumbs up, like, comment, subscribe. I can see Country First 3145 says it right there. Share and subscribe. So at the Gloria Ayo, which is easily defined. It's easy to find, right? And also Authentic African everywhere. It's different on each platform. But on Instagram, it's authentic_African because the other version of it was already taken. And then on other platforms, it's just generally Authentic African. But you guys know the logo. You know where to look. Make sure you subscribe so you see and hit the notification bell and hit all so you're notified every time a new video comes out. Pay attention for sure to what we have coming in the coming weeks. We have more on these stories and others. As these stories evolve and as other things tend to happen on the continent, because there's always something happening interesting every single week. So with that, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys all in the next live stream.